What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Everybody is shopping for Christmas gifts in these days, and I had a friend who needed help in building a budget office and gaming PC. So I decided to do this video for helping out some of you who are looking to build a similar PC. This means that today we're going to focus in building an office and gaming PC for less than 500 bucks, not including peripherals and the monitor, of course. This will be a micro ATX build, but the price for a standard ATX system will be more or less the same. What is important is that I tried to choose the components that will allow future upgradability of it. So with 500 bucks we also try to have something that will be future-proof. I will try to keep the video short, of course, but at the same time I want to detail a little bit the specs and guide you through step-by-steps through the process of assembling our PC. So let's see what I got delivered. We start with the motherboard. As you can see, I chose an MSI B550 Pro VDH Wi-Fi. We then got 16 gigs of G-Skill DDR4 3200 MHz RAM. And here obviously our CPU, not to forget also our power supply, and we will mount everything later in the video in a micro ATX case. Now let's start focusing on the CPU. For this build I went for the AMD Ryzen 3400G. I found it for $145 on Amazon. It's a 4-core 8-thread CPU running at 3.7 GHz, but with a max boost up to 4.2 GHz. It also has an integrated GPU, the Radeon RX Vega 11 graphics, which counts 11 graphic cores at 1400 MHz. This is a CPU available in the market since the beginning of 2020. My original goal was to build this gaming PC with the Ryzen 4000G series, only announced 3 months ago, but unfortunately you still can't buy those CPUs since AMD stated that this release of CPUs are mainly for OEMs. But nevertheless, the performance gain of the 4300G over the 3400G is not huge, and in most games we are talking about just a couple of frames, but it can also be higher depending on the game. This CPU will anyway guarantee a decent gaming experience in 1080p, since it will provide you slightly higher performances than a GTX 1030, for example. Opening the CPU box, we see the instructions, the CPU with an AMD sticker, and obviously the cooler. In this case we have the Wraith Spire, which will be anyway more than enough for cooling our 3400G, even if we are thinking about a slight overclock. Now, talking about the motherboard, I was looking for the MSI B550 Bazooka, but then took this one, which is $20 cheaper, but still shines in terms of VRM configuration. It's a 6-phase motherboard with 4 powerful V-core phases. I found it for $110 on Amazon, and it will also allow us some level of overclocking. Also, it's future-proof as it's compatible with the latest Ryzen 5000 series via simple BIOS update. The Bazooka has exactly the same VRM setup, but larger heat sinks, so it should have better temperatures under heavy overclock. With the motherboard we obviously get the 2 serial SATA cables, the I/O shield, the 2 antennas, and a nice MSI sticker. We also get a CD and a quick installation guide. On the I/O panel we can see immediately the Flash BIOS button, which is very helpful especially on AMD motherboards, since the AM4 chipset is compatible with several generations of CPUs. So it's very important to update the BIOS if you want to get the board to recognize the latest CPUs. We also find 6 USB ports, of which 4 are USB 3.2 Gen 1, and the other 2 ports are USB 2.0 Type A. On top of this, we also have additional USB ports possible via the internal connectors, so we have 3 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports and 4 additional USB 2.0 ports. We can see here the Intel dual band wireless with the 2 antennas and the 7.1 audio system managed by the Realtek ALC 897. The board also includes 4 serial data ports, a single PCI 4.0 times 16 slot, 2 PCI Express 3.0 times 1 slot, and 2 M.2 slots. Another plus of this motherboard is the onboard debug LED, which is very helpful as it will indicate the source of the problem so you know exactly where to look to get up and running again. This is something that you don't find on every board, so it's quite useful to mention. As we said, with the latest BIOS update you could also mount a Ryzen 5900X, for example, which doesn't make sense now, so if you buy that CPU most likely you probably go for an X570 motherboard, but it's good to know that you have this option in the future in case 2 years from now, for example, you want to upgrade your CPU with a second-hand 5900X. We also see one Realtek 8111HN gigabit LAN controller. For our RAM, I choose the Aegis G-Skill 3200 MHz. I paid $62 on Amazon for these 2 sticks of 8 gigs each. They are quite cheap, they don't have any dissipation, they don't have any RGB or LED lighting, but they are fully compatible with our MSI board. The package reports some details on the timings of these memories, and as I said, we see there is no heatsink on these memories, which shouldn't be an issue if you don't overclock them, and anyway you can also buy third-party heatsinks if you want to. So how do we power everything? Since we are building a cheap but future-proof gaming PC, I went for the Cooler Master MWE White in the version of 700 watts, and I found it on Amazon for just $55. This is an 80 plus standard certified power supply, but it's far better than many cheap 80 plus bronze PSU that I found for $50 or less. As main storage unit for this PC, I went for this Samsung Evo 850 in the version of 240 GB, which I found for just $35. For just $5 more, you can anyway find also the Evo 860. So now let's start installing our CPU. For the cooler we will need to remove these 2 clamps, so I'll start with that. I will store anyway these 2 in the motherboard box in case we need them in the future. The base of our cooler is a bit dirty since in the CPU box there were some broken pieces of plastic. So I will anyway remove the pre-applied thermal compound in order to use an high-performance thermal paste which I have already. Like for example one of these 2. I'll be using the thermal grizzle in this case. I'm using isopropyl alcohol for cleaning our CPU cooler, and I'll continue until it's completely clean. As usual for any CPU, we simply have to match the gold corner here with the marked corner on the motherboard CPU socket, the upper left section here. You can see I kept the back plate here. It is needed for mounting the wraith spire. You need to put something for holding back the back plate, or use your hands for pushing it. We can now spread our thermal compound. As usual, here we have several preferences on how to do that. A simple dot in the center, or manually spread it all over the surface, or the one I prefer, which is an X on the CPU, and then the pressure of the cooler on the CPU will do the rest. You don't want to put too little or too much thermal paste, otherwise the temperatures will be too high, but we just need the right amount. For cable management reasons, I suggest to first check the CPU fan connector you want to connect your CPU cooler to. You can install it on this side or on the other side. We first align the screws and then we start securing them working on opposite corners, just like I'm showing here. After screwing everything at 50%, we proceed little by little until everything is completely fastened. Now, before installing our memory, you need to check on your motherboard in which slots you have to install them. Most models suggest to install the RAM modules in the second and in the fourth banks, but sometimes I saw the first and the third being suggested by some motherboards manufacturers. So for this specific motherboard, I already know it will be the second and the fourth slot. Since this is a Wi-Fi motherboard, you can also mount the two included antennas, but we will be doing that later after installing everything in the case. We are going to put everything in a micro ATX case. Here I'm using the Bitfinex Phenom M80X case, which I found for just $60. Nevertheless, you can choose whatever you like. This is really up to your taste and preference, but you have really tons of choice from $30 to $100. And here in the video you can already compare the size of it, comparing it with my Thermaltake A500 TG. And by the way, if you like, you can find the review of this case in the upper right corner. After installing our SSD, I will secure our PSU in the case. I will then install the I/O shield. Then we move into the case our motherboard, CPU and RAM we previously assembled, and we'll connect everything else together. I'll speed up this part as I think it will be boring for you. We can see here we also have an ordinary hard drive for getting some additional disk space for games, for example. What I'm showing here is a Maxtor 500GB, a unit I found for just $10, but at the same price on Amazon you can find Western Digital or the Seagate Barracuda 500GB. You can also go for the 1TB version, but the price in this case will be 3 times more, so around $30 or $35. And it's done! Here you have it. Our budget office and gaming PC is ready, and it's running already some benchmarks. Now, I ran some basic benchmarks for you guys, so you can get an idea of the overall performances here. Here with Cinebench R23 we can see we got a bit more than 4100 points in multi-core performances, so similar scores to an Intel 4770K or an i7 6700. On the right side we see the CPU is boosting on all cores to a maximum to a 4.3 GHz, since I did a minor overclock with the boot. And we still have great temperatures with a maximum of 79 degrees and an average below 60 degrees, with a silent fan curve set in the BIOS and while running multiple times the Cinebench tests, which are great results considering the stock CPU cooler. In single score we have 1116 points, which is in line with the Ryzen 7 2700X or an i7 8700. At the bottom we can also see the APU is running at 1600 MHz. Here we can see how the system performs with the Firestrike, with our APU being fine at less than 60 degrees as maximum temperature. Overall great results, and we can get some additional performances by tuning in the BIOS or additional overclock. So in the end, we see it's possible to build a gaming and office PC with less than $500 and still get very decent performances in games too at 1080p. Also, the good aspect of it is that it's highly expandable. So if in a year or two you need to have more performances, or you need, for example, a game running at higher resolution, you can, for example, buy a dedicated graphic card. Or, for example, if you do heavy multiprocessor calculations, you can, for example, thinking about upgrading the CPU to a Ryzen 5000 series. As for the RAM, it should be fine for every kind of usage, but that's upgradable as well, obviously. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. I'm sure this is a system that will definitely impress you for what you can get for $500. If so, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, have a look to the other videos in my channel for more content, and in the meantime, I thank you all for watching and we'll see you in the next video.